Hi everyone, my name is Norma Rodriguez and I am part of the Skoll Foundation team. I couldn't be more excited to welcome you to this Skoll World Forum session, Building Indigenous Power to Shape and Create Our Future. This year, the forum's theme is Closing the Distance. We thought there was no better way to reflect that theme than to invite our global network to design and build a new kind of event together. I want to share a few quick items before we begin. This session is being recorded and will be released publicly after the event. Please feel free to use the chat to engage with each other and ask questions of the speakers. This session is scheduled to end in 75 minutes. After the session, please take a few seconds to complete the survey in the poll tab to the right of the hop-in video screen. On social media, we are using hashtag Skoll.org and would love for you to do the same. We are so thrilled to be able to include this session in this year's virtual Skoll World Forum and want to extend a special thank you to the team for proposing and designing it. With that, I'd like to introduce Crystal Echohawk of Illuminatives.
Thank you so much, Norma, and thank you, everyone. We are so excited to be here. Again, my name is Crystal Echohawk. I'm a citizen of the Pawnee Nation, and our reservation is in Oklahoma, and I'm founder and executive director of Illuminative, which is one of the partners behind the Indigenous Futures Project and just this amazing panel of folks that we're convening today. And we just want to express our gratitude to the Skoll World Forum and the Skoll Foundation for inviting us to really share this important research and the importance of this work moving forward and really amplifying the issues and voices of Indigenous peoples here in the United States. So we have a great 75 minutes planned for you. And so as I mentioned, I dropped in the chat, please let us know if you haven't already, whose Indigenous land you are logging in from today. And if you scroll the chat, you can find both the text number and also a dedicated link. So I'm going to open this session by just giving you a really high-level overview about the Indigenous Futures Project and some of our research findings. And then we're going to hear directly from our lead researcher, Dr. Stephanie Freiberg of the University of Michigan, followed by the executive director of the Native Organizers Alliance, Judith Leblanc, and we're also joined today by Nikki Petrie, executive director of the Center for Native American Youth. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in. And so if I could get the next slide, please. So the Indigenous Future Project, as I mentioned, is a joint project between the Center for Native American Youth, Illuminative, the Native Organizers Alliance, the University of Michigan, and also the University of California at Berkeley. And, what's important about this project is, as we've been in this work, oftentimes Native peoples are largely invisible to the American public and largely to the world. And we often don't show up in data in any sort of research that gives voice to our experiences, our history, our points of view, and our ideas and solutions for the future. And, as we have constantly throughout our work in different ways have tried to counter and fight that invisibility to really amplify Native voices and Native solutions, we were really inspired actually by a project that was started by Alicia Garza, who heads up the Black Futures Lab. And she actually started a project called the Black Census Project a few years back, which was really about how to go out and really go directly to the Black community and really start to map out what are the priorities and issues of the Black community and to be able to really amplify that. And so we were really inspired by that work. And we decided that we needed something much like it, but in service of Native peoples. And how do we amplify Native people's voices here in the United States? And so that is how we joined forces with our partners to really design the Indigenous Futures Project. And as a part of the project, a cornerstone of that is the Indigenous Futures Survey, which we first launched last year. And it's really the cornerstone. And it was conducted for Indigenous peoples and led by Indigenous peoples, which is really extraordinary and often very unique because we find ourselves as Indigenous peoples often being the subjects of non-Native researchers, right? And so to have this be an Indigenous-led project with Indigenous, researchers really, steering us. It was groundbreaking from the beginning, right? And so important. But it was really, as we entered into this project, and you're going to hear more about, we were really, looking at how we understand and amplify the priorities and needs of our Indigenous peoples here in the United States. And how can we take this data as a foundational point that can really inform advocacy, to really find ways to bring us together, to organize and really to build power for our people around things that are critically important to our communities. And so that's a little bit of the background on the history. Next slide. And so what's really we're so excited and excited about was that we had such an incredible amount of participation in the Indigenous Futures Survey. And mind you, we developed and launched this project last year, right at the height of COVID. I think we got the green light to move forward literally in March 2020. And this posed a lot of challenges to us as partners, as research team, knowing that we couldn't really go out into communities and survey. Normally, we would try to go door to door. We would try to look at those traditional ways to really engage people's input and participation into this survey. And so given the pandemic, we knew that we needed to be very creative about how we engaged with Native peoples. And so one of the things that we did is we worked really closely with our partner, Judith Leblanc at the Native Organizers Alliance and Center for Native American Youth and others, to really recruit Native peoples from all over the United States in their communities to really help us digitally organize within their networks, to get members of their community, elders and others to be able to participate and take the survey. And as you can see, we had over 6,400 participants from all 50 states representing 401 tribes. And so it completely blew us away. I think when we first started, we thought maybe we're going to get a couple thousand people, and to see that we were able to post those kind of numbers and just to see that sort of geographic distribution and engagement was really extraordinary. And so we're going to hear more from Stephanie about other things about the importance of this research. But I think, just to note, again, you can see sort of the spread, and those numbers within the map represent sort of participants by state. Another significant thing is that, of all of those respondents, about 75% were women. So we saw women being incredibly engaged during this time period. Next slide. And so the breadth of the research is really, there is so much. And if you ask our partners, it was really hard to sort of narrow down what can we highlight and share during this short amount of time that we have with you. But we knew as we were launching this survey last year during the pandemic that one of the core elements that we really needed to survey Native peoples on was the impact of COVID-19, right? Imagine that we were literally fielding this survey during the summer when we were all really beginning to understand the impacts of it from the standpoint of not only health, but access to things like PPE, testing, how is that affecting people's finances and employment and whatnot. So here you can see we wanted to uplift some of these important findings. And when you can see that we did find that there were issues with people accessing PPE and testing. I think one of the most important things that we saw come out of this was also really getting a sense of the impact it was having on people's mental health. I mean, 31% of people reported feeling depressed, 54% frustrated, and a high number, over 60%, really feeling stressed, and to start to feel those impacts. And this was still relatively early on within the pandemic. We also see that it had significant financial impact on Native families and Native individuals all across Indian country, as well as students. We saw a lot of students who were not planning on returning last fall, whether it was because they just didn't want to take online courses, but many just could no longer afford tuition or had to stay home and take care of family members who were being affected by the pandemic. I think probably the biggest headline out of this, or one of the big headlines as well, is that the disproportionate impact on low-income Indigenous participants was very clear. Anybody making less than $45,000 from not only in terms of their impact to their finances and their mental health, but even, looking at, deaths, there was actually a higher number of deaths with those folks. So that is something that we really need to be paying attention to in terms of not only the disproportionate impact of COVID on Indigenous communities, but on low-income Indigenous communities. Next slide. Other key elements that, that I would like to lift up, from the survey findings was that, given when we fielded this survey, I mean, this is also right when the United States is going through its first phase of reckoning with systemic racism, right on the heels of the murder of George Floyd and people taking to the streets. And really the issue of systemic racism coming central into the conversation. So we really wanted to ask people how they were experiencing racism and discrimination. And we found that 65% of those that participated feel like they face significant discrimination. They also feel like 87% of Americans do not care about what is happening with Native peoples. And that is really profound. And just that we do not feel seen. We feel ignored by the media, by government, and really, during the pandemic, just feeling that real sense of erasure, right? And that we weren't being covered in the media. And so this issue of invisibility, which we'll explore more with Dr. Freiberg and our other partners and panelists, is really significant in terms of its links to discrimination and racism. Next slide. The other thing that we want to lift up, we had an incredible amount of young Native people, participating in the survey. And what we found is that they're incredibly active and engaged in civic activities. They're really passionate about issues around mental health, missing and murdered Indigenous women, preserving language and culture, but also caring for elders. But we also found that a lot of youth are really struggling with political engagement, particularly around voting, just due to disillusionment with the government and just wondering about the two-party system, right? And so we're going to hear more from Nikki about that. So I really want to pause there, right? There's just so much to kind of highlight in terms of the report, but I wanted to give you sort of a breadth and understanding and a background to the project. And now what I'd love to do is really call into the circle our longtime research partner, Dr. Stephanie Freiberg, who is really just a renowned researcher and leader from the Tulalip tribes. She's at the University of Michigan, and who's really the foremost expert, particularly on issues around the impact of invisibility and bias and so much more. And so Dr. Freiberg, we'd love to hear from you, just your insights about the importance of Indigenous futures and this type of research. Do we have Dr. Freiberg? Dr. Freiberg, are you there? Okay, I think we might be having an issue. Oh, okay, it looks like we're having some tech issues with Dr. Freiberg. Hopefully she can get logged back on. I would like to call up Judith Leblanc from Native Organizers Alliance. If Judith could join us. And Lincoln, you can turn off the presentation so it can just be Judith and I. And then I would kindly ask the Skoll World Forum tech support team if they can help Dr. Freiberg. I'm not sure what happened, but hello, Judith.
Hi, how are you?
The wonders of technology, right?
Truly.
Yes. So Judith, in your own words, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience joining us today.
So my name is Judith Leblanc. I'm a citizen of the Caddo Nation of Oklahoma. I'm calling in from unceded Lenape territory, also known as Harlem, New York. You may hear the sounds of the city from the window to my left here. I have been living here for many years, so I'm an urban Indian whose hat is really in Indian country, wherever our people live. I'm the director of Native Organizers Alliance, and we were founded as a national Native organizing and training network over 11 years ago as part of a grassroots mobilization, political mobilization to support the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, which became a part of the Affordable Care Act. So we grew out of being engaged on the issue of healthcare at the grassroots level. And we have grown into a training center working with many communities across Indian country on how to organize based on our traditional ways of building community. And I'd like to say we've been organizing since dirt.
I love that. Oh, there's Dr. Freiberg. The wonders of technology. We're so glad you're back. So I think, Steph, let's see. Why don't we, Judith, you just got to introduce yourself. Let's go over to Steph, right, while we have her, and then I'll come back to Judith because you and I are going to have a discussion about the political significance of this work. Does that sound good? Steph, welcome back. So really, want to make sure your audio works, but would just love for you to introduce yourself first to our audience here today, and then to really just be able to share your thoughts on the importance of this particular project, but Indigenous-led research.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. Don't know what happened. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge my people. I am part of the Coast Salish people of Washington State. I'm a member of the Tulalip tribes and grew up on the shores of the Puget Sound. I'm extremely grateful to my family and to my ancestors whose shoulders I stand on today. And as the senior researcher on this project, I'm grateful to be here to share our work with you. So my entire research career, I have spent fighting for the visibility of my people and leveraging science and data to address important social issues impacting Indigenous people. Along the way, the message that Native voices are not important, that there's nothing we can learn from studying Native people that we don't already know, that Native peoples are just too small of a population, or that it's just too difficult to include their perspectives or experiences, have shaped every aspect of the work that I have engaged in. Yet today, we stand here with the first iteration of the Indigenous Futures Survey with over 6,000 Indigenous people across the United States. This data, as Crystal mentioned, was collected during a global pandemic and yet represents one of the largest efforts ever conducted to enhance and illuminate the voices and perspectives of Indigenous people. This work is a testament to what is possible when you work with communities and value their perspectives. Now, as the senior researcher, I want to share some insights from a research perspective and to provide a short call to action. First, this unprecedented endeavor was a proof of concept that research conducted in collaboration with Native communities is possible. Second, this project demonstrates that it is possible to collect data from Native peoples and to elevate Native voices on important issues. We can no longer hide behind the idea that Natives can't be included because there isn't enough data or that the population isn't large enough. Finally, this research endeavor has illuminated a number of issues about what it means to engage ethically with Native communities when it comes to research and data. So first, and probably most important, data and research are not neutral. For so long, Native people have been cast through a deficit perspective or described by researchers not engaged in our community. These do not advance change or capture the realities of so many Native tribes and individuals. Second, and here I give a little shout out to Judith, research is not just about learning about Native peoples, it is about learning from Native peoples. And third, Native people are not a monolithic group. We represent a diversity of languages, cultures, histories, and experiences. And the Indigenous Futures Project very much illuminates this diversity. From one community to the next, there are tremendous differences in wealth, education, and job opportunities, and access to mental and physical health care, to just give a few examples. Moreover, within our communities, there are enormous differences based on our various sexual, gender, religion, education, social class, or cultural levels of identification. Overall, and potentially most important, is that the Indigenous Futures study reveals that Native people want their voices heard. Research is one way to uplift these voices and perspectives. We need to raise the bar for future research. We can no longer default to a lack of access or to small numbers, and we can no longer allow scholarship that treats Natives as a monolithic group or that dismisses or ignores the experiences of our people. We cannot talk about the history of race, discrimination, or bias without considering the experiences of Native people, both historically and contemporarily. We exist today, we are here, and we are holding up our voices loudly. And we are asking the world to see us for who we are and not for who you want us to be. Foundations can play a big part in helping to raise this bar. Fund research with and in tribal communities, hold researchers to this higher bar, and help us to create a better future for our people. Lastly, when I look to my own tribal community, when I engage with Native students in my classroom or in my lab, or when I work with Native communities, I see every day the hopes and dreams of resilient and strong Indigenous peoples who are making their way in the world. But when I look out at society, I also see the realities of systems that have also left many of our people struggling and our children literally dying. My Indigenous relatives around the world deserve so much better. And this project was one way that we are attempting to work to make sure that we find this just future. And so it's been my privilege to be part of this project, and I look forward to the further conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Freiberg. And we're going to come back to you in a little bit because we're going to have a really good moderated discussion with you and the other partners. So I want to go ahead and call into the circle, call Judith back into the circle. And we're going to have some discussion about the really important political significance of these findings. So hello again, Judith. Thank you for being flexible in and out of the circle here. So Judith, as we said, Dr. Freiberg just reminded us, we launched this in the midst of a pandemic, but there wasn't just a pandemic, was it? Really dramatic, complicated political environment, and a time when our country was just like in tremendous pain, suffering. We've got, this contested election, everything running up to it, this crisis around, and finally a reckoning with systemic racism, and just these kind of right-wing provocations that were happening. Can you talk to us a little bit about why the Indigenous Futures Survey was important, and specifically like looking at the role of community engagement in terms of the findings?
Yes, and when we add all those factors together within the context of a global humanitarian crisis, it seemed like the only thing we should be doing, because the Indigenous Futures Survey was and is a tool to document these troubled and turbulent times, to confirm what we have been experiencing, to weave our experiences, our hopes, our dreams with scientific data, to advocate for change and build grassroots political power. We need both our values and spirituality, but also we need scientific facts. Although we know nobody would drive drunk or smoke cigarettes if science could win the day, we cannot solely rely on our values. We need data that's grounded in scientific research. And it's been a blessing to work with Dr. Freiberg and the other researchers to crunch the data we collected from the moccasins on the ground. The survey is and was an opportunity to promote an Indigenous framework for understanding our role individually and collectively in the present, both Native and non-Native. What is our role? The Indigenous Futures Survey itself and the way that we organize to ensure that grassroots peoples, tribal communities, urban Indian communities participated All of our work flowed from one, that we are all related, we are in relationship with each other and with the natural world, and that in the present we bring the future and the past together. We are carrying ancestral responsibilities to maintain a cultural and spiritual continuum. We are responsible to reflect on what the past teaches us. We have the responsibility to prepare for all those who come after. And we are responsible to each other and to our communities. So for example, in the survey, the top issues were that people were concerned about was caring for our elders, caring for those, for the emotional well-being of our communities. Think about it. If in every arena of life, political, economic, values, social relationships, societies, if all those areas of life were guided by an Indigenous framework, how different this world would be. How different it would be if we understand that we are all in relationship to one another. And in a lot of ways, I think the Indigenous Futures Survey showed not only to our people, but to non-natives, that an Indigenous framework is a guide, and that in some ways, I like to say the future is Indigenous, because indigeneity is not about being Indian. This survey shows that indigeneity is about understanding our relationship to place, our understanding of our relationship to history of place, history of peoples, history of the natural world, and to bring those two realities, the future and the past, together by what we do, especially in our most difficult time. One of the learnings from the survey that I think is really important to understand how we must continue to organize a grassroots Native political movement to meet the needs, not only of our people, but to help be a part of the solutions to climate chaos, to right-wing provocations and systemic racism. One example is that the survey showed that those who were most connected to cultural practices also were the most politically engaged. And you have to understand from our vantage point that since first contact, the government's policies have sought to sever our ties to land, culture, language, and collective community. So in a certain sense, by voting, by this data showing that many of the most politically engaged are connected in a direct way to the practices of our values and our traditions, it really is uplifting, because we know that in the 21st century, if you're going to build a movement that's effective in articulating the needs of Indian country, you have to be closely connected to the ways of building community, traditional culture in our communities, the hundreds of communities in which we come from. So I think the importance of conducting this survey was to confirm through data what our experiences have been historically, in the present, but also what our dreams and hopes are. And utilize the voices of the grassroots in developing the scientific data, which will make for strong advocacy for social change.
Ah, so beautifully put, Judith. Well, and I know as we were all working together as a collaborative team, right, to really, partner with Dr. Freiberg and Dr. Eason and their team and Nikki and our respective teams, we knew COVID was going to be a big theme, but we knew that voting, the election, right, you kind of hit on some of those issues. But, I think oftentimes people if they think about anything about Native peoples, about voting, we don't vote, you hear a lot, or we just only hear about the voting barriers, right? And in working in and around progressive movements for years, it always seems like even like the wokest of the woke, progressives don't always think about Native peoples in the context of voting and having an important role in elections. Yet we found 77% of our people voted in the previous election prior to to 2020. And that, we found out really interesting things about what, for 80% of the people participating in the survey, that they pay attention to candidates' platforms, right? That those issues matter. They are engaged, they're informed, and they're active. But also it was really interesting too to find out that 97% of our folks don't trust the government. And so these are really interesting data points. And so I'm wondering, Judith, because you led a major initiative in Natives Vote 2020 with Native organizers across 9 states. We worked together. But can you tell us about how these findings showed up in your organizing work? And also, I think, even some of the narratives within the media.
Well, I have to admit, I wasn't surprised by many things that we found in the Indigenous Futures Survey. But I was a little surprised at the level of political sophistication. Dr. Freiberg was mentioning the fact that some, say that we're statistically insignificant, but, what we found is that we're politically significant. We're politically significant, and we must be included in how candidates and elections and policies are developed. Why? Because we are a very educated electorate and we are consistent. So, I don't think it's a mystery that there was such a big historic turnout of Native voters. COVID and the policies of Washington, D.C. made it clear that protecting land and water, providing support for our community, especially elders and those who are struggling for emotional wellness, those who are concerned and are trying to protect our languages. The absolute necessity for our treaty right to health care from birth to death should be guaranteed. All those issues were on the ballot in the minds of our community because it is such a difficult time for us. And many people in this moment, in that moment of the elections, that is, literally risked their lives for our right to vote. Although the experience is that government policies, especially in this moment, have failed us. And the truth is that in Indian country, there was a broad grassroots discussion about rather not voting is sacred, rather not it was the right thing to do. But the truth is, many of us who were organizing, the moccasins on the ground in these 9 states where we worked, that we realized that if we yielded the right to vote, we would lose our chance to choose who would be on the other side of the table when we were negotiating over land rights and protection of water or health care or all of the issues. We'd lose our right to help to choose who we'd be negotiating with. We also saw that a pretty clear-cut understanding that we had to play our role in Indian country, that there wasn't one community that was going to turn the tide, but that it would take an understanding of all being in relationship with the Black, the Latino, the immigrant community, the labor movement, all who had been hurt by government policies in a very, very devastating way in the last 4 years. But the truth is that we were working in the most infectious areas in the country, in the US. For example, in Menominee County, which is in northern Wisconsin, one of the battleground states, the Menominee Reservation is located in Menominee County. That county was the most infectious county in Wisconsin. The work that our partner community group did and the Menominee tribe helped to mobilize a 23% increase in voter turnout over the last national election. 23% increase in the middle of a devastating pandemic. I think it only highlights the fact that unless we had this data, unless we understood, and frankly, we were seeing the proof of this data on the ground before we saw the data. That's a fact. So when we saw the data, we weren't surprised because that's what we saw on the ground. So I think the importance of the elections, we captured it in the data. And in many ways, it's a guidebook for organizing grassroots political power, but it's also a guidebook for those who were elected in the 2020 elections. These are the policies, these are the issues, these are the hopes and dreams that our people are concerned about. And I am so looking forward to the 2021 Indigenous Futures Survey.
And we're going to get more into that as well. So thank you, Judith. We're going to come back to you during our group discussion, but I would love to call Nikki in to the circle from the Center for Native American Youth. Hi, Nikki.
Hey there, nice to see you. Thank you so much. His lock, he's jint is squisquai quele, chins jits he's squisquai Nikki Petrie, chits ihi islim hua aki chinlem, ahi dodoko chin yukwe eat. Hey everyone, I introduced myself in the way that I was taught in my traditional tongue. I share that my Indian name is Meadowlark, I'm a member of the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and my English name is Nikki Petrie. I said my heart is very happy today and that I care about the next generation. I greet you all with a warm handshake and a happy heart. I serve as the executive director for a policy program called the Center for Native American Youth, which is housed at the Aspen Institute. We work with self-identified Indigenous youth, 24 and under, on leadership and empowerment, policy change, narrative change, all through Indigenous evaluation and culturally immersive curriculum. We're proud to serve as a platform and vessel for Native American youth. And at CNA, we worked with young people from throughout the country to take the Indigenous Futures Survey and to mobilize their relatives to do so as well. So recently at CNAY, we brought together focus groups of Native youth to analyze the data and to build a youth narrative based off of their experiences and what they're seeing firsthand in their communities. Additionally, with this narrative, youth created policy recommendations for the new administration that we're going to be presenting to the White House next week. So you get a little sneak peek before the White House does. But to start, I'd like to share that Native youth identified the interconnectedness of all the priorities and findings of the Indigenous Futures Survey. Youth recognize that all things are related, and what brings them together is our Native culture. For example, caring for elders and preserving tribal languages. If we care for our elders, then we're preserving our language because our elders are the keepers of the language. And if we don't have access to language, it's impacting our mental health. So I'll say this again so word sinks in. Native youth believe that culture is the answer in addressing all our priorities. As Crystal mentioned, improving mental health was the utmost importance for Native American youth surveyed in the Indigenous Futures Survey. Almost 90% of the 18 to 24 population indicated that this is extremely urgent or urgent priority for Native communities, including high rates of suicide and addiction. 28% of youth indicated that mental health concerns had the largest impact on their own lives. 84% reported increasing access to quality healthcare is extremely urgent or urgent priority for Native communities. Our focus group members identified in particular concern of accessing mental health resources on and off reservations in rural areas and in urban spaces. One youth from Quinault shared that pre-pandemic, her community already had high rates of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and today those rates are at a record high. She works in the behavioral health clinic at Quinault and believes that the facility is over capacity because of the lack of access to community and culture that has been imposed by COVID-19. So to be clear, mental health has always been a concern for young people, but COVID-19 has exacerbated the needs to improve mental health. The focus group states, resources available generally tend to lack cultural responsiveness and understanding of the challenges and struggles specific to communities such as intergenerational and historical trauma, the collective and communal nature of the Native experience. Youth recommend the following policy change: permanently and fully fund the Indian Health Service. And after the pandemic, there needs to be an increase in greater access to mental health resources. Additionally, Native youth request to expand resources within Health and Human Service Administration SAMHSA branch. Native youth express the importance in providing culturally rooted mental health resources and intervention methods for their community. Let's move on. CNAY's Native Youth Focus Group states, for centuries, systems in the United States have functioned to enforce white supremacist values, including non-white populations from enjoying freedom, safety, equality, which has left many relatives vulnerable to violence, hate, insecurity, and more. Today, our communities, leaders, and especially our youth are continuing to demand change, equity, and justice. In this survey, youth shared that addressing violence against women, children, LGBTQ+ individuals are their second highest priority. In addition, over 77% of youth agree that improving relations with criminal justice system is extremely urgent or urgent priority. This pressing issue has led Native youth to request reform in the Department of Justice reporting process of missing and murdered Indigenous people, including the critical responsibility of information sharing. Youth requests that Department of Justice expand the prosecution of non-Native perpetrators on Native land to ensure that tribal communities can act within their inherent right to sovereignty. Finally, Native American Youth Focus Group recommend that the administration invest in the juvenile justice system by providing culturally relevant counseling, chemical dependency support, and occupational training. As previously shared, caring for elders is a top priority for Native American youth. Elders are highly respected, cherished, and honored in Indigenous communities. I'd like to take a moment to share a cultural teaching with you that supports why young people prioritize caring for elders. You see, elders and youth are close to afterlife. Youth are just coming into this world, and elders are not far from leaving this world, which creates a sacred connecting thread that the belief that they're actually closer connected to each other than we are. And as we've all experienced, COVID has impacted how we care for our elders and how we're able to sustain culture through our elders. A youth from the Salt River Pima Maricopa community in Arizona shared that her grandpa passed away during stay-at-home orders. And although he didn't pass from COVID, COVID impacted her ability to grieve. And it also impacted her access to culture, as her grandpa was a well-respected language keeper of the community. She states, "Everything we've had to do to keep ourselves safe from COVID is exactly against what our culture is, by not gathering with people, not sharing food, not being able to be with our loved ones when we're grieving, and not being able to mourn in our cultural traditional manner. There is a lot of anger and frustration in not being able to support and care for our elders." Youth also prioritize preserving their tribal language, which we understand now is deeply connected to caring for our tribal elders. So youth request long-term support for Indigenous languages from the administration. The focus group states that we recognize the critical intersections of access to cultural practice and health outcomes for Native people. Tribal communities need sustainable investment in tribally led language programs, which are key for community health. Native youth are calling on the establishment of an advisory committee within the Department of Education to develop a national revitalization plan to support communities across Indian country. In the Indigenous Futures Survey, we learned that Native students who didn't plan on returning to school in the fall were for the following reasons. They need to care for their family, tuition's too high, or they're not able to do online learning or don't wish to. Additionally, 15% of college students did not have access to PPE, and 40% didn't have access to testing. Over half of the students reported that their financial situation worsened during COVID, and 48% were either laid off or had their hours cut back because of COVID. 74% of youth reported feeling stressed, 64% reported feeling frustrated, and 40% reported feeling depressed. As a youth from Cook Inlet in Alaska shares, Native students aren't learning at the same rate as peers online because it does not fit with the way that we have been raised traditionally. He talked about the best classroom and the best lessons that he's learned are at the foot of an elder and not in an institution. Native youth recommend greater access to broadband and an increase in digital opportunities for intergenerational learning. Additionally, Native youth seek to increase holistic education opportunities. Our focus group have identified the need for accurate representation in national curriculums and believes that the Department of Education has an opportunity to address historical underrepresentation and calls on the state to correct historical inaccuracies. Lastly, I want to talk about representation in the media. Social media is a primary source of news for youth ages 18 to 24. In our focus group, Native youth discuss this in a positive way, noting its strengths in connecting individuals, ideas, and information around the world. We have seen it within the last year that youth can lead social movements online. They can host forums. They can get a community to mobilize in civic engagement. They can get their people to take the Indigenous Futures Survey and truly ignite change that they desire to see in their communities at the click of a button. Social media platforms such as Instagram and Facebook have brought voice and visibility to Indigenous issues. Youth also notice visibility, invisibility, and misunderstandings of Indigenous people in news outlets, also as a significant issue. In contrast, Indigenous voices, issues, and successes are often silenced and overlooked by national news networks. 33.5% of youth report tribal newspaper as a primary news source, where in a similar portion, 34% obtain their news from newspapers. The focus group agrees that youth perceive these sources as similarly reliable sources of information, but notice that tribal news sources are not given equitable representation. The Native Youth Focus Group suggests that this is due to a lack of Indigenous representation in non-Native news coverage sources. Native youth request an increase in Indigenous representation within the context of all platforms to uplift Indigenous television and media, to increase opportunities for Native people to share their narrative in their own voice, just like we're doing today. Look, there is so much more to share, but my time here is up. I encourage you to support Indigenous-led research like Dr. Freiberg and her team, and to support Indigenous-led movements. Limlynch Inchas Beus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I'm going to ask you to keep your camera on and call Judith and Dr. Freiberg back in if you turn on your cameras and open your mics, because we're going to have a good discussion together. So thank you so much for each of you, for your insights, for everything you did in this project, and the fact that, you know, it turned out so well given pandemic and just sort of this perfect storm of everything that happened in 2020. I think one thing I want to come to you first, Dr. Freiberg, you know, as we were looking at the research design around this, and I think this often comes up, right? And I'm going to use the example of the Washington football team, NFL football team. You worked something you had done for a long time. But oftentimes there's polls, right, out there that say, well, Native Americans think X, right? And so therefore, in that instance, it was 90% of Native Americans support mascots in the Washington football team. And there's this, I think a lot of people obviously think about Native Americans oftentimes as a monolith, and that we must all think alike. And I know that that was something that really came as a central part of discussion and also in the research design. So I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit about the work that you and your team did to kind of really build that out and address the issues around identity.
Yes, thanks. So I think there are a couple issues here. I think one is to ask the question where these polls get their subjects. And whether, you know, one of the big differences between the work we did with Indigenous Futures Survey and what these national polls do is that we built a network through tribal communities. We connected with tribes, with Native organizations, with university Native student organizations. You know, we made a real concerted effort to reach out to parts of our communities that are not reached. So when we look at these national polls, the question is, where are they finding their natives? It's very hard to get natives to a national poll. It's very hard to, you know, sample from the general population until you get 500 natives. But you know, there's many issues when you rely on 500 natives. You know, if you think about can 500 Native people represent 576 tribes? No. And that's part of the issue, is that we continue to allow you know, non-Native organizations, national polls to represent us and to represent our perspectives in ways that don't account for the diversity of Native views. And you know, what we tried to do with respect to the mascot issue was to take a different approach, to really think of Native people through, you know, through these very diverse identity perspectives, to look at how do these attitudes vary by engagement with different levels of engagement with tribal culture, or different levels of identity centrality, like how important being Native is to my sense of self and my well-being, and really trying to rethink how we conceptualize who likes and who doesn't like. And interestingly, in the work that we've done, we can't replicate that 90%. No matter how we look at our data, even if we look at people who just claim to be a descendant of a Native tribe, we still saw 40% were opposed. And so, but then when we look at Native people who are highly identified, very involved in their tribal community, 75% are offended by Native mascots. Like these, different ways of looking at these issues are so important if we really want to give true voice and true perspective to Native people and the diversity of Native perspectives across the country.
That's so true. Thank you so much. Judith, I think oftentimes when people think about research, right, they think about it lives off in academia, right? And certain people use it, or policymakers, right? Talk to us about the importance of research data like this in grassroots organizing and just really in that frame of building power for Indigenous peoples, Native peoples, and why did you want to get involved in this project? Why is this research and data so important?
Really, it was for two reasons. One is that we, when we're in such difficult situations, which we've often been, but this one so global and such a breakdown of system breakdown, it is way too easy to focus in on responding to one thing or another, crisis problems. And this survey provided a basis for us to have conversations with tribal leaders and Native community organizers about the horizon. Because if we learn from our ancestors, and I mean all of our ancestors collectively, from Nelson Mandela to the suffragettes in the United States, if we learn from all their experiences, then we know that we have to spend, I would say, 60% of our time thinking about how we're going to get to the horizon where healthcare is a right, not a privilege, education is a right, not a privilege, that corporate greed doesn't dictate government policies, people's needs do. Then we have to respond 40% of the time in a way not to keep ourselves busy and feeling fulfilled because we're with the people, but actually thinking through, does this campaign, does this action, does this public education form actually point us towards that horizon, which is a moving target, but nevertheless to be strategic in what we are focusing on. And so we wanted this survey as a guide for how to see what should the future be, where should we be headed towards, and what's going to make it possible. So for us, for example, voter civic engagement is a 365-day-a-year goal for us. That elections are a snapshot of our political power. It's their political power, those who we oppose, and our political power. But the truth is, it's a snapshot. And we either utilize that information and the information we collect, from the grassroots to shape what we do day to day, or election day won't show the true nature of our political power and our commitment to protecting the future generations. So that was one reason, to be strategic, to be more strategic. The second reason is that many of our groups had never really done community-based research, because they're community groups, they're traditional societies, they're tribal leaders and tribal entities. So we are beginning a long-term process to help those who are organizing at the grassroots level and who are representing our nations to really think about, what is our community actually concerned about? What are their perceptions of the experience? What do they want us to do in order to achieve self-determination and sovereignty, and to fulfill the role that we must in preparing for future generations? So those were the two reasons. There were others, but because I like you all and it's fun to work with you all, but those are the two main ones.
That's so good. Thank you. And Nikki, I'd love for you to sort of tag on to that, right? And I think we've had the opportunity to hear some of the behind the scenes stories about how the young leaders you get to work with every day have started, pulling this data into focus groups and other things. And when we think about that horizon that Judith was speaking about, I'm just wondering if you want to elaborate a little bit more about why this kind of research is so important to the work that you're doing with young people and leadership development and really, change that impacts our young people.
Thank you. I really believe that there was such an opportunity for us to allow young people to tell us where their priorities are, what are their hopes for the future, what is their trust or distrust. And I believe that with this knowledge from the data comes a responsibility for us to create meaningful programming and curriculum to address those needs for young people. And so as a result, the Center for Native American Youth has launched several different programs and initiatives. One that was very much in conjunction with IFS called Democracy is Indigenous, getting young people to mobilize on civic engagement in response to young people not thinking that their voice matters or to a previously historical voter turnout. And so being able to have this science from an Indigenous researcher by Native people for Native people for the very first time to confirm and to help reiterate the need to create culturally immersive programming that is supported by data. It's absolutely amazing. And our young people are so excited and mobilized and ready to start thinking ahead and to make those hopes for the future, that last question that we asked, to make those hopes a reality. And so we just really look forward to the opportunity to continue to create meaningful opportunities for our young people for that.
Thank you for that, Nikki. And we have a couple questions in the chat, and I'm going to open up for any of you to jump in and ask. And we had a question from one of our participants about re-indigenization versus decolonization. Those are very distinct approaches, and wondering if folks want to put in their 2 cents about that. The other question that's just come in, right, and you guys can decide which one you want to tackle, but somebody was saying, I love the framing of values, and what if we had Indigenous values informing our politics and economic systems? What would that look like, right? And I think that's so much behind when we think about Indigenous futures. So ladies, we got 2 questions on the table. Would love to invite you to comment on one or both. Don't be shy. I see Dr. Freiberg smiling, so we can go first.
Oh, no, I won't smile again. No, but I think the question of values really also speaks to the issue of priorities. Part of what we did by this open-ended question that we asked at the end about what is important to our people, what do we want for future generations, is our attempt to give voice to those values, to allow our people to say what's important to them. We're going to take the time to code and analyze and really give voice to that perspective. And so, I think, will we ever have a point where we can say these are the values of Indigenous people? No, because there's a lot of diversity among us. But there are certainly there are values that I think are very common amongst us. A sense of collective responsibility, a sense of being relatives with all of the people within our tribal communities and across the nation. We use that term, all my relations, for a reason, that we are bound together by this indigeneity. Within that indigeneity, a responsibility to give back to our people. That first and foremost, we're not guided by our individual wants and desires. We're guided by a responsibility to 7 generations forward. And that idea, that concept that we're always thinking about, do we want to make this move now? Is it in the best interest of our children in the future? These are ideas that cut across, or values that cut across Indigenous communities around the world. And so as we think about what it means to revitalize, what it means to hold on to, what it means to take the voices of our elders today and really hold them and value them and make sure that we don't forget them. And, there's been a crisis. The pandemic has led us to a place where we've lost a tremendous number of Indigenous elders around the world. And it's terrifying to many of our communities because that's a loss you can't get back. And so, as we look forward, right, I see as part of our responsibility by taking on this task of an Indigenous Futures Survey 2 or 3 and continuing is that how will we continue to uplift the voices of our people, to give voice to those values, to give voice to the priorities of our people, and then to take those voices and make sure that people in positions of power hear them. And so, that's a value that I, as a researcher, have held onto, to constantly ask myself, if I'm going to take on this project, what am I doing for my people? What am I doing for Indigenous people in this country and around the world? For me, my people stretch into Canada. So I've always had a real strong sense of indigeneity. There's a border that cuts through the Coast Salish people, and it's an arbitrary border. They speak the same language, share the same values. We cut across that Canadian border. And so for me, those, how we think about those issues and how we continue to move forward as an Indigenous group, both as researchers, as a team, is about how we will contribute to all of those issues.
Thank you for that. And, that reminds me, I can remember some of the stories that I think each of you would have shared at given points where elders were really super excited to get the opportunity to participate and have their voice heard. Or I remember my 20-year-old was like, what? You want to know what I think? So I don't know, Nikki or Judith, if you have anything on this question about what would, with our values, right, would really drive these systems. But it also, I think Dr. Freiberg teed up, something here about the excitement about Indigenous Futures 2.0 and going forward and what we're going to do that again. So I would also love to kind of weave that together about what you ladies are excited about looking ahead about what more can be done on this. Judith or Nikki? Yeah.
I absolutely love normalizing Indigenous values and really and I think that when we do that and normalize it, it really dismantles the predominant white society of what they told us our values and what success needs to look like. And so when I think about looking ahead, I think about what we can do to empower all members of our community and young people especially to lead with these traditional values of humility, respect, love, honor. In this focus group that I had talked about earlier, we asked about leadership and we had asked them, what traits do leaders have or people that you respect and look up to? And the responses weren't focused in on what Ivy League school they went to, how much money they make, what kind of house they live in. Rather, they identified what leadership truly looks like. Do they care for their people? Are they humble? And so in what ways can we dismantle the hierarchy, prioritize and normalize conversations on Indigenous values? And I think that when we do that, young people especially are truly going to be empowered to show up holistically and find new ways to succeed in our society. And when I think ahead about, an opportunity to survey young people again, I hope that we're continuing to add voice and, showing our young people that their voice matters. I think that, there's just such an opportunity to continue to give young people a platform in speaking their truths through the vessel of a survey.
Judith?
I think one of the things that is really, really important for us to understand is that every day we're creating traditional culture and values. We're bringing from the past some of these common ways of knowing and thinking that Dr. Freiberg talked about, but we're also creating values going forward. And that traditional practice, I mean, my family were leaders in the Peyote Church, the Native American church. And I know from my own lifetime, because I am an elder, that the way peyote ceremonies were conducted 25 years ago are different than the way they're conducted now. And the way I experienced them 25 years ago were different than the way, and because our cultures are learning from one another. So for example, Standing Rock. In my opinion, Standing Rock created kind of a culture of stepping into prayer and spirituality as a powerful political organizing tool. We didn't invent it. It's not our discovery. We're not going to discover any more Plymouth Rocks. What it was a reflection, Standing Rock and that prayer camp to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline was a reflection of the Black Lives Matter movement, was a reflection of the dreamers, the immigrant young people who did direct action to fight for their rights, the fast food workers who were protesting for minimum wage, a living minimum wage. So we were in fact part of this larger political and social atmosphere. And so I think that one of the things that we need to think about is that why is that happening? Relationality. We all are related. What we do has impact far beyond our immediate circumstance. We are in relationship with the natural world and with each other. So therefore, if you had a response to COVID, which was guided by that Indigenous framework, how would vaccines be handled differently? Or testing? Like, what would be the approach of the US government and other governments if we were guided by the fact that we are all related? And in our experience here and in Italy and many places, people began to understand that Indigenous concept of relationality, because when people in New York City would open their windows and beat pans, play instruments, and sing to honor the healthcare workers, the supermarket workers, and the transit workers, they were doing that because they recognized their family's health was as important as those who work in the hospitals, who drive the buses, and who are working in the supermarkets. So I think we have a good beginning towards a future that is Indigenous, but it is a framework and a medicine that we, the Indigenous peoples of the United States, can bring into the social movements. It's a medicine we can bring into the political arena, into the economic planning arena, into the urban planning arena. And frankly, I think hearts and minds are open to it right now, all across the globe.
I love that. So we just have a few minutes left. And what I'd like to do is, again, for our audience, again, we want to encourage you to, go onto, I just dropped the link into the chat where you can download all the research. We have 2 different reports that are available. But, what I'd love to do is a little bit, we're going to be launching Indigenous Futures 2.0, right? The next phase of the survey, which will be fielding, as early as this summer. And I'd love to hear from you ladies, final closing remarks, but just really, what is the call to action? We have a great audience here today from people from all over the world, from different backgrounds, but also there's a lot of members of philanthropy, policy leaders, and others that are tuning in today. And so we'd just love to your closing thoughts and your call to action for our audience. And we'll start with you, Dr. Freiberg.
Well, I think, as I said before, I think the important call to action is that we need to raise the research bar. So obviously, data plays an important role in helping guide resources, who gets access, who doesn't. And frankly, researchers who want to study Indigenous communities need to be held to a higher bar. Similarly, funders, foundations, National Science Foundation, they all also need to hold people to that level, but also to put forward funds. It is so important that we learn more about the needs, priorities, and values of Indigenous communities. And so the call to action is we all need to step up. I mean, my team is working hard. We're trying to get better every time. I think our team here, we continue to build our coalition to expand our reach within Indian country, to make sure that we are getting voices that would not otherwise be heard. Putting, as Judith would say, moccasins on the ground to reach, rural communities that may not have access to internet, to make sure voices of elders who may not know how to access technology or who don't have technology have the opportunity to share their voice with us. And so, I think the call to action is we have to continue to raise the bar, to let people know. I do not want to hear anybody say that there's a dearth of data or that Native people are not a big enough group, because we have proven, right, in our second rendition that we all helped with, the Native COVID Alliance project, 15,000 Natives completed our survey. So, we continue to move forward, but I would like to see the research world do better.
Nikki, closing thoughts, your call to action?
I think my call to action is simple: and continue to engage in normalizing conversations about Native people, help us address our priorities and help us with solutions. Bring the findings of the Indigenous Futures Survey to life. Bring them into your workplace, into your families, and continue to have discussions and work alongside us. Work alongside Indigenous youth to amplify them and provide the platform and resources they need. Thank you.
Judith, final thoughts and your call to action.
What they said. I would up the ante a little bit on, the biggest support we need is resources, both human and financial resources. And the human resource side is not only our moccasins on the ground and raising the funds to ensure that we can do that outreach, but it is also in you utilizing this survey and the next survey and the one after that, because globally there is not a clear understanding of who Native peoples are in the United States in the 21st century. And instead of starting with, just to work back to history from the present. And so I encourage you to use the surveys in every level of teaching, from children to college courses. And lastly, I think you all will learn so much about the role of Native women. This big win of Madam Secretary of the Department of the Interior, Deb Haaland, being confirmed and nominated did not happen because of goodwill. It happened because the grassroots political power of the Native vote was clear in the election results, and we organized that vote to press the transition team and to press the administration to do what is necessary in the 21st century, to have a Native woman lead the department that touches every aspect of our lives, from healthcare to education to governance. So what Native women, what we're doing, how we're leading, and I think, I hope that you'll be able to track what we do going forward and see that Native women have always and will always play a really important role in strengthening our communities.
Thank you so much, Judith. And I want to again thank our partners. These are really remarkable women and remarkable, organizations and institutions that they represent. And if we had another box here, there would also be Dr. Ariane Eason, who is also, so much a part of this work. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And again, I dropped the link into the chat. You can download, there's 2 reports, the one on building power that has so much of the voting and civic engagement data and findings within that, and then our COVID report. And stay tuned, because Indigenous Futures 2.0 is coming, and we need you, right? There's so many great ideas here about not only research here in the United States, but how we link this globally. Indigenous peoples are like the 2nd largest population in the world, but we need investment. And so that is the call to action for any funder that is watching today, is that we need more investment in Indigenous-led research. And we just want to wish you well. Thank you so much for joining us today, for taking this hour and 15 minutes out. And we look forward to engaging with you more. Take care and have a great rest of your day.